Alright, Book of Enoch, chapter 85. Again I looked attentively, one while sleeping, and surveyed heaven above. Behold, a single star from heaven fell from heaven, which being raised up, ate and fed among those cows. After that I perceived other large and black cows, and behold, all of them changed their stalls and pastures, while their young began to lament one with another. Again I looked in my vision and surveyed heaven, and behold, I saw many stars which descended and projected themselves from heaven to where the first star was, into the midst of those young ones, while the cows were with them, feeding in the midst of them. I looked at it and observed them, when behold, they all acted after the manner of horses, and began to approach the young cows, all of whom became pregnant and brought forth elephants, camels, and asses. At these, all the cows were alarmed and terrified, and began biting with their teeth, swallowing and striking with their horns. And they began also to devour the cows. And behold, all the children of the earth trembled, shook with terror at them, and suddenly fled away. Again, I perceived, chapter 86, again I perceived them, when they began to strike and to swallow each other, and the earth cried out. Then I raised my eyes a second time towards heaven, and saw in a vision that, behold, there came forth from heaven, as it were, the likeness of white men. One came forth from thence, and three with them. Those three who came forth last seized me by my hand, and raising me up from the generations of the earth, elevated me to the high station. Then they showed me a lofty tower on the earth, while every hill became diminished, and they said, Remain here, until thou perceivest what shall come upon those elephants, camels, and asses, upon the stars, and upon all the cows. Chapter 87. Then I looked at the one of the four white men who came forth first. He seized the first star which fell down from heaven, and binding it hand and foot, he cast it into a valley narrow, deep, stupendous, and gloomy. Then one of them drew his sword and gave it to the elephants, camels, and asses, who began to strike each other, and the whole earth shook on account of it. And when I looked in the vision, behold, one of those four angels who came forth hurled from heaven, collected together, and took all the great stars, whose form partially resembled that of horses, and binding them all hand and foot, casting them into the cavities of the earth. Chapter 88. Then one of those four went to the white cows and taught them a mystery. While the cow was trembling, it was born and became a man, and fabricated for himself a large ship. In this he dwelt, and 3 cows dwelt with him in that ship, which covered them. Again I lifted up my eyes towards heaven, and saw a lofty roof. Above it were 7 cataracts, which poured forth on a certain village much water. Again I looked, and behold, there were fountains open on the earth in that large village. The water began to boil up and rose over the earth, so that the village was not seen, while its whole soil was covered with water. Much water was over it, darkness and clouds. Then I surveyed the height of this water, and it was elevated above the village. It flowed over the village and stood higher than the earth. Then all the cows which were collected there, while I looked on them, were drowned, swallowed up, and destroyed in the water. But the ship floated above it. All the cows, the elephants, the camels, and the asses were drowned on the earth, and all cattle, nor could I perceive them, neither were they able to get out, but perished and sunk into the deep. Again I looked in the vision until those cataracts from the lofty roof were removed, and the fountains of the earth became equalized, while other depths were opened, into which the water began to descend until the dry ground appeared. The ship remained on the earth. The darkness receded, and it became light. Then the white cow, which became a man, went out of the ship, and the 3 cows with him. One of the 3 cows was white, resembling that cow. One of them was red as blood, and one of them was black, and the white cow left them. Then began wild beasts and birds to bring forth. Of these things the different kinds assembled together: lions, tigers, wolves, dogs, wild boars, foxes, rabbits, and the hanzar, the sisset, the sisset, the avist, kites, phoncus, and ravens. Then a white cow was born in the midst of them, and they began to bite each other. When the white cow, which was born in the midst of them, brought forth a wild ass and white cow at the same time, and after that many wild asses. Then the white cow, which was born, brought forth a black wild sow and a white sheep. The wild sow also brought forth many swine, and that sheep brought forth 12 sheep. When those 12 sheep grew up, they delivered one of them to the asses. Again those asses delivered that sheep to the wolves, and he grew up in the midst of them. Then the Lord brought the 11 other sheep, that they might dwell and feed with him in the midst of the wolves. They multiplied, and there was abundance of pasture for them. But the wolves began to frighten and oppress them, while they destroyed their young ones, and they left their young in torrents of deep water. Now the sheep began to cry out on account of the young, and fled for refuge to the Lord. One, however, was saved, escaped, and went away to the wild asses. I beheld the sheep moaning, crying, and petitioning their Lord with all their might, until the Lord of the sheep descended at their voice from his lofty habitation, went to them, and inspected them. He called to the sheep which had secretly stolen away the wolves, and told them to make the wolves understand that they were not to touch the sheep. Then the sheep went to the wolves with the word of the Lord, when another met him, and proceeded with him. Both of them together entered the dwelling of the wolves, and the conversing with them made them understand that from thenceforward they were not to touch the sheep. Afterwards I perceived the wolves greatly prevailing over the sheep with their whole force. The sheep cried out, and their Lord came to them. He began to strike the wolves, who commenced a grievous lamentation, but the sheep were silent, nor from the time did they cry out. I then looked at them until they departed from the wolves. The eyes of the wolves were blind, who went out and followed them with all their might. But the Lord of the sheep proceeded with them and conducted them. All his sheep followed him. His continuance was terrific and splendid, and glorious was his aspect. The wolves began to follow the sheep until they overtook them in a certain lake of water. Then that lake became divided, the water standing up on both sides before their face, and while their Lord was conducting them, he placed himself between them and the wolves. The wolves, however, perceived not the sheep, but went into the midst of the lake, following them and running after them into the lake of fire. But when they saw the Lord of the sheep, they turned to fly from before his face. Then the water of the lake returned, and that suddenly, according to its nature, it became full, and was raised up until it covered the wolves. And I saw that all of them which had followed the sheep perished and were drowned. But the sheep passed over this water, proceeding to a wilderness, which was without both water and grass. They began to open their eyes and to see. Then I beheld the Lord of the sheep inspecting them, and giving them water and grass. The sheep already mentioned was proceeding with them and conducting them. And when he had ascended to the top of a lofty rock, the Lord of the sheep sent him to him. Afterwards I perceived their Lord standing before them with an aspect terrific and severe, And when they all beheld him, they were frightened at his countenance. All of them were alarmed and trembled. They cried out after the sheep, and to the other sheep who had been with him, and who was in the midst of them, saying, We are not able to stand before our Lord, or to look upon him. Then that sheep who conducted them went away, and ascended the top of the rock. And the rest of the sheep began to grow blind, and to wander from the path which he had shown them, but he knew it not. The Lord, however, was moved with great indignation against them. And when that sheep had learned what had happened, he descended from the top of the rock, and coming to them, found that there were many which had become blind, and had wandered from his path. As soon as they beheld him, they feared and trembled at his presence, and became desirous of returning to their fold. Then that sheep, taking with him other sheep, went to those which had wandered, and afterwards began to kill them. They were terrified at his contingence. Then he caused those which had wandered to return, who went back to their fold. I likewise saw there in the vision, that his sheep became a man, built an house for the Lord of the sheep, and made them all stand in that house. I perceived also that the sheep which proceeded to meet this sheep, their conductor, died. I saw too that all great sheep perished, while smaller ones rose up in their place, entered into a pasture, and approached a river of water. Then that sheep, their conductor, who became a man, was separated from them, and died. All the sheep sought after him, and cried for him with bitter lamentation. I saw likewise that they ceased to cry after that sheep, and passed over the river of water, and that there arose other sheep, all of whom conducted them, instead of those who were dead, and who had previously conducted them. Then I saw that the sheep entered into a goodly place, and a territory delectable and glorious. I saw also that they became satiated, that their house was in the midst of a delectable territory, and that sometimes their eyes were opened, and that sometimes they were blind, until another sheep arose and conducted them. He brought them all back, and their eyes were opened. The dogs, the foxes, and wild boars began to devour them, until again another sheep, three arose, the master of the flock, one of themselves a ram, to conduct them. The ram began to butt on every side of those dogs, foxes, and wild boars, until they all perished. But the former sheep opened his eyes, and saw the ram in the midst of them, who had laid aside his glory, and began to strike the sheep, treading upon them, and behaving himself without dignity. Then the Lord sent the former sheep again to a still different sheep, and raised him up to be a ram, and to conduct them instead of that sheep who had laid aside his glory. Going therefore to him, and conversing with him alone, he raised up that ram, and made him a prince and leader of the flock. All the time the dogs troubled the sheep. The first ram paid respects to this latter ram. Then the latter ram arose and fled away from before his face, and I saw that those dogs caused the first ram to fall. But the latter ram arose and conducted the smaller sheep. That ram likewise begat many sheep, and died. Then there was a smaller sheep, a ram, instead of him, which became a prince and a leader, conducting the flock. And the sheep increased in size and multiplied, and all the dogs, foxes, and wild boars feared and fled away from him. That ram also struck and killed all the wild beasts, so that they could not again prevail in the midst of sheep, nor at any time ever snatch them away. And that house was made large and wide. A lofty tower began built upon it by the sheep for the Lord of the sheep. The house was low, but the tower was elevated and very high. Then the Lord of the sheep stood upon the tower, and caused a full table to approach before him. Again I saw that those sheep wandered, and went various ways, forsaking that their house. And that their Lord called to some among them, whom he sent to them. But these sheep began to kill, and when one of them was saved from the slaughter, he leaped and cried out against those who were desirous of killing him. But the Lord of the sheep delivered him from their hands, and made him ascend to him, and remain with him. He sent also many others to them to testify, and with lamentations to exclaim against them. Again I saw, when some of them forsook the house of their Lord and his tower, wandering on all sides and growing blind, I saw that the Lord of the sheep made a great slaughter among them in their pasture, until they cried out to him in the conscience of that slaughter. Then he departed from the place of his habitation, and left them in the power of lions, tigers, wolves, and in the power of foxes, and of every beast. And the wild beasts began to tear them. I saw too that he forsook the house of their fathers and their tower, giving them all into the power of the lions, to tear and devour them into the power of every beast. Then I began to cry out with all my might, imploring the Lord of the sheep, and showing him how the sheep were devoured by the beast of prey. But he looked on in silence, rejoicing that they were devoured, swallowed up, and carried off, and leaving them in power of every beast for food. He had called also 70 shepherds, and resigned to them the care of the sheep, that they might overlook them, saying to them and to their associates, every one of you henceforth overlook the sheep, and whatsoever I command you do, and I will deliver them to you numbered. I will tell you which of them shall be slain, these destroy. And he delivered the sheep to them. Then he called to another and said, understand and watch everything which the shepherd shall do to these sheep, for many more of them shall perish than I have commanded. Of every excess and slaughter which the shepherd shall commit, there shall be an account, as how many may have perished by my command, and how many they may have destroyed of their own heads. Of all the destruction brought about by each of the shepherds, there shall be an account, and according to the number I will cause recital to be made before me, how many they have destroyed of their own heads, and how many they delivered up to destruction, that I may have this testimony against them, that I may know all their proceedings, and that delivering the sheep to them, I may see what they will do, whether they will act as I have commanded them or not. Of this, however, they shall be ignorant, neither shalt thou make any explanation to them, neither shalt thou reprove them, but there shall be an account of all the destruction done by them in their respective seasons. Then they begin to kill and destroy more than was commanded them. Then they left the sheep in the power of the lions, so that very many of them were devoured and swallowed up by lions and tigers, and wild boars preyed upon them. That tower they burnt, and overthrew the house. Then I grieved extremely on account of the tower, and because the house of the sheep was overthrown. Neither was I afterwards able to perceive whether they again entered that house. The shepherds, likewise, and their associates, delivered them to all wild beasts, that they might devour them. Each them in his season, according to his number, was delivered up. Each of them, one with another, was described in a book. How many of them, one with the other, were destroyed in a book? More, however, than was ordered, every shepherd killed and destroyed. Then I began to weep, and was greatly indignant on account of the sheep. In like manner also I saw in the vision him who wrote, how he wrote down one destroyed by the shepherds every day. He ascended, remained, and exhibited each of his books to the Lord of the sheep, containing all which they had done, and all which each of them had made away with, and all which they delivered up to destruction. He took the book up in his hands, read it, sealed it, and deposited it. After this I saw shepherds overlooking for 12 hours. And behold, 3 of the sheep departed, arrived, went in, and began building all which was fallen down of that house. But the wild boars hindered them, although they prevailed not. Again they began to build as before, and raised up that tower which was called a lofty tower. And again they began to place before the tower a table, with every impure and unclean kind of bread upon it. Moreover also all the sheep were blind, and could not see, as were the shepherds likewise. Thus were they delivered up to the shepherds for a great destruction, who trod them under foot and devoured them. Yet their Lord was silent until all the sheep in the field were destroyed. The shepherds and the sheep were all mixed together, but they did not save them for the power of the beasts. Then he wrote the book, ascended, exhibited, and read it in the residence of the Lord of the sheep. He petitioned him for them and prayed, pointing out every act of the shepherds, testifying before him against them. Then taking the book, he deposited it with him and departed.